Hey everyone, welcome to the Troy Christian High School Chapel Podcast. At the end of this episode, please take a moment to subscribe to our Chapel YouTube channel and follow our Chapel Instagram account. Those two places will be the easiest way to check out what's coming up, as well as find some bonus content from our speakers and worship team. Most importantly, I hope the following message challenges and encourages you to grow in your relationship with God as you learn to love God and love others better. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody. It's Tommy Royce here. I'm here sitting next to Scott Smith. Scott, you want to say hi?
Yeah. Hey, you are pulling the intro right now.
I am.
You're pulling. We're switching seats. Well, we didn't. I'm actually still in the regular seat, but you're pulling the host card today.
Trying to. We'll see how this goes. So stick around, and we'll see. If this crashes and burns, or
I'm here for it either way.
If we just have a good podcast that's normal. So Scott,
yes sir.
This week in chapel, we had something that we call TC Talks.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of a play off of TED Talks, and if you know what TED Talks are, which a lot of people do, they are kind of these shortened messages, kind of shorter than your average lecture. And so similar to that, we have TC Talks in chapel, where instead of one long message, we had 5 speakers, and they all gave these like 5 or so minute messages, and we kind of put them all in a row. And one of the fun things about it was that they were all students. We had 4 seniors and 1 junior, all share messages. And one thing that I love just about Troy Christian Chapel specifically is our emphasis on student leadership. If you've noticed, our worship team is mostly comprised of students, and our worship leaders, like vocally, are always students. And that's kind of a decision we made, not out of like necessity,
right,
but just out of kind of what we value, and what we value is student leadership. And having student speakers do the TC Talks, and we'll have student messages throughout the year too. That's something, we don't choose out of necessity, but choose out of our choice of valuing student leadership. So what have you done kind of in your leadership to kind of promote student leadership, and what is your vision and motivation behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been really focusing on student leadership probably for the past, I don't know, it's like 12 or 13 years where we started getting really intentional about student leadership. It was shortly after I came on staff here, and we had a gentleman who was doing student leadership in our area. And so I kind of followed him, was mentored by him. And his whole philosophy was basically like, just throw kids in the deep end, like just get them out leading, and then kind of coach and tweak as you went along, which I loved, because growing up, and the models that I saw around us of what student leadership programs looked like were put them in like conference settings, put them in like teach them about leadership. So there was a lot of like sit and get kind of stuff. And the difficulty, I think the unfortunate part of that is you learn a lot of stuff, but you're not necessarily like actively applying it. And I've found that I've learned way more when I've had to be in a situation where I've had to like think on my feet and actually speak up and lead in different ways. And I remember back in high school, when I was in high school, that happened to me. Now looking back, I'm like, that was reckless in a way. But our senior trip, they asked 3 of us seniors. We were going to New York City. We were serving in a homeless shelter. And they asked 3 of us seniors to go to New York ahead of time and like learn the subway system, learn a way around New York, because the rest of the class was coming like in 3 days. And we were like going to show everybody, like we were going to like lead. And there were no adults. There were 0 adults went with us. So we went, me and one of my friends were literally just walking around New York for like 3 days as an 18-year-old in high school. No, I was 17. I wasn't even 18 yet. I was 17. And then the class got there and I had to like learn my way around and lead adults. I'm a 17-year-old and I'm leading like 50-year-olds. Right. And it like that moment clicked for me. Like okay, a little irresponsible sending 17-year-olds to New York City on their own.
No texting, no tracker apps.
No.
You know,
We had listen, no cell phone. I had a Polaroid camera. Like that's what I was given because they're like, hey, while you're there, here's the landmarks you need to take pictures of them as proof. And I'm like, okay, I'm like 17-year-old me's like, yes, like this is awesome. But the mentality or the thought process behind that was. I don't know if this was theirs, but in my mind, the thought process was like, wow, I've been taught leadership, but I'm learning way more about leadership doing it now than I ever have been taught. So those kind of two things, that experience for me, and then being mentored by this guy in our area that did that, it was very much like, okay, if we're going to do leadership here, what we have to do is give students opportunities to lead. It was literally give away my leadership. That's what it was. It was not like I'm going to teach you about leadership. We're going to teach you about leadership, but you've got to get an opportunity to experience it, to fail sometimes, and that's okay. But to be coached through the process. So it was very much, there's an author, speaker, Tim Elmore, founder of Growing Leaders. He talks about events and processes, like how you mentor, especially how you mentor leaders. But it's very much that idea of like, have an event, have something where they're leading, that they're doing something, and then help process that with them, sit down with them, talk that through. And so that's kind of the mentality that we have with it. And that's where like chapel time is huge for that, because it very much, how many times do students, and we're not like a huge Christian school, right? We're big in our area, right, in terms of numbers. But how many times in high school do students get a chance to speak for even 5 minutes? Or, like this coming week, we got a student who's going to be doing a full message. Mm-hmm. How many times do students get a chance to speak in front of 300, 400 people, live and do something, especially like a message where you're leading people spiritually? I still get nervous and wrecked a little bit preparing for the times that I do that as a 16, 17, 18-year-old. That is a big deal. And we find students respond to it well. Like the audience, like, our student body responds to it well, but then the students who do it get to see God move in ways that, if we just sat down and talked about leadership, wouldn't be the same.
It wouldn't. It kind of reminds me, it's a little TC history here. Mm-hmm. Scott, you were the kind of chapel director when I was in high school. And so you were teaching junior high Bible. Yep. And I didn't have you for that, but you started when I was already in high school. And by my junior and senior year, I got the opportunity to speak in chapel as a student. And just to kind of
Jesus people love. I still remember the message. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I still like the impact of that opportunity, just to kind of affirm everything you're saying for what it does for our students. I can, affirm that by saying it was impactful for me. I, as a junior and senior in high school, and was trying to figure out what career path did I want to go on, what major did I want to take on in college. And, I had different options in my head as possibilities, and ministry and theology was one of those. Mm-hmm. And I got the opportunity to speak in chapel, and, for all intensive purposes, I feel like it went, at least well enough that I enjoyed it and thought like, okay, this is something I could see myself doing. And you can fast forward to today, and I'm, working with Bible classes and in chapel and doing all that kind of stuff now. And I don't know if I would be doing what I'm doing now if I didn't have the opportunities in high school to lead in those kinds of ways. And so I think one of our motivations with student speaking isn't necessarily to just make every student like, a future pastor or chapel leader, but like to empower each student to get an opportunity to become a leader, and so that they get those opportunities and experiences for their future.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's huge. That is a big benefit of giving away your leadership, because ultimately I think we learn most about our direction and future and even purpose through the experiences that we have. And we've had students who, you had the experience of, you speak and you're like a light bulb moment almost comes on, or like it's just something that gets reaffirmed for you that like, yes, I loved that. I feel like I want to move more in that direction, right? And there's some students who get those opportunities and the opposite happens. Like, it was fine, it went okay, but like, I don't know that I want to keep pursuing. Either way, it's a win, right? Because clarity comes, right? The clarity comes with direction, and that's just a huge benefit to that for each of those students individually. It also gives younger students a vision for like, oh, that's a thing that I may be able to do as a student, not so much that it's just like an adult piece. I remember going, when I went into college and was studying theology and ministry, the number of students who were going to school for ministry but had never delivered a message, had never taught a sermon, had never mentored or discipled people really. And I was like, man, how, like, I know you can have that calling in your life, but how can you like go forward with investing that much money without having that affirmation take place? As you're kind of moving in that direction, it's kind of a scary thing. And so I think, man, that clarity comes by giving them the opportunities to kind of jump out and do that.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I remember same thing going into. I remember being in preaching class in college, and for some of my classmates, that their assignment to give a message to their fellow classmates was the first sermon they ever preached, and that I definitely took for granted before that moment. Definitely took for granted the opportunities that I had and many other TC students have had. Yeah. For that. Yeah. Being like, oh yeah, this is like my, fifth or fourth, like one at, 19 years old. So what were some of the things you did kind of like initially to start implementing student leadership as the norm at Troy Christian, when you first started working here?
Yeah, we had some outlets. There were already some things in place, mission trips, local service projects. We had student council, those kinds of things. I think the difference was they tended to be more student or more adult leader focused. And we just started making a shift to say, okay, how do we start leveraging students as positions of like key leadership in those areas? So on a mission trip, instead of saying, okay, the adult is going to give the direction of like, oh, when we're going here, when we're getting on the bus, is everybody all here? We started having students do that. So the students were now looking to the other student leader to say like, where are we supposed to be? So the students would come like, hey, when are we doing this thing? And we'd be like, well, go ask Johnny. He's the leader, so go ask him. So it was very much just like starting to defer that kind of who they were looking to for leadership to those students. So that was one of those things because we already had the outlets for. The other big thing was I in particular started really looking at students who had a passion for something. And we started saying, okay, you're passionate about this, you want to do something. How do I help you actually jump into that? So we started these student initiatives that were like, clean water initiatives, right? Human trafficking initiatives. I remember one in particular where students were like, there were a couple of girls who were just like, they had that moment of like, this is not right. We called it those Popeye moments, from that Popeye cartoon, right? Like the moment where he's like, this is all I can stand. I can't stand no more. Like somebody needs to do something about this. And I would be looking for those in my conversations with students. I'd be looking for those moments and we're like, okay, so why don't you do something? Let's talk about what you can do with that. What are some steps, even just small steps you can take? I think a key piece to this is also, this is really important. it's not, we want to make sure that we're like not defining leadership as a person that stands up and gives direction. That's not at all. That's such a narrow view of what leadership is. Leadership in its like simplest form is influence, right? It's your ability to influence, to sway, to move somebody either in thought or action in a direction that you believe is right or necessary. And so as a result of that, yeah, we have students who speak in front of chapel. We have students who will lead a mission trip or lead a service opportunity. We also have students who lead through just serving, right? We have, I mean, even in any given chapel, yeah, we might have a student speaker, but we also have probably 15 students who are leading worship in other ways, who are leading tech behind the scenes. All of those people are learning and experiencing leadership because they are influencing the environment of what's happening. And so what we're trying to do is combine these like, hey, you enjoy this, you're passionate about this, you're moved by this. How do we give you opportunity to get involved and do something about it, right? And so those were the things that we started looking for. So the program, so to speak, was less like, okay, here's the 5 steps we're going to follow. It was more of, let's find the kids who need the next opportunity.
Right.
And then let's just sit down, let's have some conversations, let's give some opportunities for them to take some steps in that direction, and let's see how far we can take it, right? And that's really became the model that we've been, kind of utilizing, exploring ever since.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's kind of stood out to me throughout this whole, process of being a TC student and then working and leading at TC, is I think sometimes we assume that like if we hand out too much leadership to other people, we're gonna like compromise quality in some sort of way. Like let's just bring in some professional musicians to lead worship.
Right.
Let's bring in pastors to speak to us all the time. Let's, speak ourselves. Let's have our paid tech people run all the tech dynamics of chapel. And we think that would be the best way to approach it. But our student body is way more talented and gifted than we would have never known about it if we had not tried all these different opportunities. And I think chapel is better and more special because of all the student involvement, whether it be from the stage or behind the scenes.
Oh, for sure. And when people are students, adults, this isn't just a high school thing. This is like, any organization. When you get your people involved in doing stuff, you have more buy-in, period, because they're invested in it, right? And so it increases culture because people are buying into what's going on and they're taking ownership of it, which is the whole. I mean, that's the whole thing. You're creating a culture around people who actually want to be a part of what's going on, and as a result, it's fighting that consumerism mentality of like, I'm just gonna sit, like, you entertain me. Was it, like, that's a question, was this good or not? Like, did I enjoy it or not? Well, that's different when you're just sitting back and getting it versus like, well, was this good or not? Well, I was a part of running graphics and slides for this. That person's going to have a way different experience of it and buy-in and I think even change around it because of how they're involved and invested in the process.
For sure. I was actually talking with Tim and David about this earlier, about how there's this interesting dynamic with Troy Christian Chapel that I don't see in other ministries. And it's this idea that, like, if we had even the same 5 speakers like rotating in and out, people would kind of be like, oh, we're just doing the same thing over and over again.
Yep.
Where if you go to your local church, you're going to hear the same speaker 50 out of 52 weeks of the year, and the same worship leader 50 out of 52 weeks of the year. And there is this kind of just this acceptance of that system being the norm, and that being kind of the expectation. Where I think what we have kind of tried to create here is this sense of no, everyone's an owner
That's right.
of this ministry.
That's right.
There's a lot of people who can lead. There's a lot of people who can speak. No need to lean on one talented speaker or one talented musician. Even if they're incredible, people, I think our student body would rather see more and more different people leading, even if it's, like, not perfect every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's kind of, I don't know, I think a unique factor in what we're doing here at TC Chapel that I think really could translate other places and be effective.
I agree. It's interesting. It is interesting though that like the same students will have that expectation here that like, oh, we're going to have a variety, like we're all invested. We're going to hear from and be led by a lot of us, right?
Right.
But they're also, many of them are involved in organizations that are singularly led. And it's just interesting how that dynamic plays out with it. But I love that expectation here.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want it any different.
It's not even just student leadership, like
No.
we have talked, if you've been tracking along, like Tim preaches and he's
That's right.
also our tech guy. Like,
That's right.
Find another, like, it's not common for a ministry to have the tech guy in like the speaking rotation,
That's
right.
right.
And then we've got, so many student speakers, like kind of how we like the TC talks, that's 5 student speakers. That's like, the equivalent of a church having 5, just kind of random congregant members, giving a message. There's this like, and now I think about, like you and I are kind of like the, chapel director roles, and I've preached once all semester.
Yeah, right. Me too. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, you would think my job as chapel director would be to
Right.
preach regularly, but it's not. And that's kind of like, it's the ripple effect of you giving leadership away, from day one, and then other people coming in and that being the cultural norm. Now my thought is like, okay, I'm trying to fill a speaking schedule. How do I give it away as much as possible?
right.
And you see the same thing, with how Tim leads tech and David leads, sound and things like that. Like, it's barely
That's right.
us running things.
That's right. And I want to say like a key piece to this too is we're not adopting, I said that one of the mentors that I had early on was very much like throw them into the deep end and let's see what happens. We don't operate that way. We very much do, okay, we're going to prepare you.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to prepare you for everything with it. Like, cause there's some nuance to an experience live that when it happens, right?
Yeah.
But we're going to prepare you. We're going to sit down. We're going to talk through things. We're going to help you. You sit down with each student and you help them kind of frame and structure their message, even if whether it's a 5-minute or a 15-minute, doesn't
Exactly.
matter. We're gonna walk you through so that we're not going to set you up for failure.
Yeah.
And Tech Crew does that too. You walk through each of the pieces. Okay, here's what's going to happen. If we do a student initiative, we're preparing those students.
Yeah.
We're going to sit down and talk through these things. You're still going to probably, it's not going to go flawlessly necessarily maybe, but it's going to be successful because you've done it. And then we can debrief afterwards on like, okay, what went well? What didn't go well? How did you feel about that? How did that shape your perspective of what God's doing in your life right now? Like all of those kinds of things are going in behind the scenes that nobody else necessarily really sees.
It's true. Yeah. I came from a meeting with this week's student speaker into this podcast recording. Like that's just,
right.
It's not a throw them to the wolves kind of situation. No. It's a we're gonna kind of prep you the whole way and be kind of your coach and your mentor, instead of just being this is what we're good at. We'll just do it ourselves.
Yeah, here's the opportunity. Good luck. Right.
Right.
We're not gonna do that.
I want to touch base on the. How do you think that? Okay, we've talked about how student leadership opportunities affect our student leaders who are taking those opportunities. Mm-hmm. How do you think our student body responds to being led by students as opposed to being led by adults on a regular basis?
Well, I across the board, I think there's a huge positive reaction from that. I think they enjoy that. They want that. They honestly, I would say they need that. Because when it's just adults leading a culture that involves students, because I want to make sure that we understand, like, Troy Christian's not like, when we talk about the culture here, we're not talking about just student culture. We're a total community together, staff, students, everybody. And when a culture that involves students is led only by adults, I think subconsciously what happens is it projects a vision of spiritual growth that I'll be able to get there when I'm an adult, right? Like when you preach, man, when you preach, and sometimes just like some of that stuff that you bring is just like mind blowing. Like it takes me sometimes a week to like digest kind of what you're doing. Man, I think if that's all they got, it would be like, well, yeah, of course, because you're an adult, and I'll maybe be able to get there when I'm an adult. When a student leads, it's like, oh, now this is something that I can grab a hold of now. It's not like an adult thing. This is something that I can kind of see and experience now with that. And I would also say when adult leads in a community or culture that involves students, you automatically are going to have less buy-in from students. Mm-hmm. When students are involved in the leadership of it, it has a more organic, like, oh no, this is us. This isn't just we're a part of a school or an organization. This is who we are, because we're invested in being led by our peers, by each other, and that's paramount for any organization.
Yeah, I think about how, especially in our like ministry context, obviously being a Christian and speaking and leading, one of the challenges we consistently put in front of our students is to love others.
That's right.
And to love others well. And I think sometimes coming from an adult, it can kind of sound like, all right, kids, like play nice,
Yeah.
And kind of like,
yep.
Okay. But when you have students who are kind of leading the charge on loving others, it's that more organic.
Yeah.
Like we are being led in this direction, and this is where we want to go, and we're going there.
Yep. And I would say, this might be a bad analogy. I would say it's kind of like you need both, right? You can't, like, you got to have a balance of both going on there. And it'd be kind of the equivalent of like cheerleaders in a student section. You know what I mean? Like you need cheerleaders to give that direction and go, but you also need students in the student section ramping things up.
Yeah.
And adding to that, like, this is who we're not just following the direction of somebody else. We're like, this is who we are together. And so there's that, you can see a difference between a student section or like an event where it's just the cheerleaders versus like when you have people in the audience like really grabbing a hold of what's going on and investing in it themselves too.
This week we're looking forward to seeing another student speaker take the mic, and I'm sure that we'll have more throughout the rest of the semester. And it's been interesting trying to empower and like facilitate like student leadership, especially with all that we've got going on this year with different regulations and whatnot. But what I've noticed is that that student leadership might be just the kind of spark that we need right now.
Absolutely.
With kind of the cloud of, COVID and all its impact on the year. And so I think the future's bright for us the rest of the semester.
Yep. I will say, if you're kind of like tuning into this, there's a couple like just takeaways that I feel like are helpful. If you're an adult mentoring a student in any way, you cannot mentor without creating opportunities for them to experience something. If your mentoring relationship only exists of you sitting down and just talking, eating, drinking coffee, talking, whatever, take some steps to like do something together, to find out what they're passionate about and seeing what you can encourage them to jump into. If you're a student, And I know, think for a lot of students, they're like, I'm just not sure what I'm passionate about. I'm not sure what I'm moved by yet. Go out and experience some things. Go out and start reading, start seeing what's going on. Find out, like really tune into what is stirring your heart, what's moving you. And then find a mentor, right? To start moving in that direction, to lead. There's nothing, especially in today's world, there's nothing stopping you from leading and making an impact and influence with people around you. So I think those are kind of two pieces that, so it's not just us talking about what we do here. I love what we do here. I think we could talk about it all day long, but I think just some things that I think people can move in without even being a part of our team. There's lots of ways for people to move into that space of leadership.
Yeah. And I think if you're in the leader role, you will thank yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
If you end up giving more opportunities away and more kind of giving your leadership away to other people.
Yep.
And I think that's a good note for us to wrap up on.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you everybody for listening, and we'll join you next week.